First contact at Starbase 7. The ambient hum of Starbase 7's fusion core was Maya Chen's constant companion as she traced her fingers along the corroded power conduits. Floating in space at the intersection of three major trade routes, the station was humanity's newest triumph in interstellar diplomacy and its biggest maintenance headache. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," Maya muttered, adjusting her diagnostic tool. The holographic readout flickered, casting blue shadows across her face. Above her, through the transparent aluminum viewport, distant stars wheeled slowly as the station rotated, maintaining its artificial gravity. The engineering bay door whispered open, bringing with it the scent of something like crystallized honey and morning frost. Maya didn't need to turn around to know a Silurian had entered. Their distinct biochemistry always announced their presence before their footsteps did. "Engineer Chen," the melodic voice called out, each word precisely measured. "The Council requires your expertise." Maya turned, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. The Silurian standing in her workspace was tall, easily 7 feet, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. His ceremonial robes, impractical for the engineering deck, she noted, rippled with embedded light patterns that seemed to pulse in time with his breathing. "Ambassador Kavoth," Maya replied, recognizing the distinctive marking patterns around his throat that indicated his high rank. "What brings a member of the Silurian diplomatic corps down to the grease pits?" Kavoth's secondary eyelids flickered, a sign of either amusement or indigestion. Maya was never quite sure which. "Our quantum communication array has begun experiencing anomalies. The Council's session with the hegemony begins in 6 hours, and we cannot risk a diplomatic incident." Maya sighed, looking at the half-disassembled power conduit. "The station's primary systems can wait," Kavoth interrupted, his head frills rippling with urgency. "This is a matter of galactic security." Something in his tone made Maya pause. The Silurians were known for their rigid adherence to protocol and their tendency toward dramatic overstatement, but Kavoth seemed genuinely concerned. "All right," she said, gathering her tools. "Lead the way." The Silurian diplomatic sector was 12 levels up and a world away from the utilitarian engineering spaces. Here, the corridors were lined with living crystal that hummed in harmonic resonance with its occupants' biorhythms. Maya's presence created discordant notes in the symphony, a constant reminder that she was an outsider. Kavoth's private office was smaller than she'd expected, dominated by a complex array of quantum communication equipment that would have made any human engineer drool with envy. But something was clearly wrong. The usually pristine crystalline matrices were clouded, and the air crackled with misaligned energy. "When did this start?" Maya asked, already running scans with her diagnostic tool. "During the last rotation cycle," Kavoth replied, moving to stand beside her. "The degradation pattern is unusual." Maya frowned at the readings. "These energy signatures, they're not random interference." She looked up at Kavoth. "Someone's trying to hack your comm system." The Silurian's frills flattened against his neck. "Definitely alarm this time." "Impossible. Our quantum encryption is being unraveled at the quantum level." Maya interrupted, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "Whoever's doing this understands your technology better than they should. But they didn't count on one thing." "And what is that?" Maya grinned. "Human engineers are really good at breaking things. Sometimes that includes breaking other people's attempts to break things." For the next hour, Maya worked in a focused frenzy, her mind racing ahead of her hands as she reconfigured crystalline matrices and rewrote quantum algorithms on the fly. Kavoth watched in fascination as she dismantled centuries of Silurian communication protocols and rebuilt them with human improvisation. "There," she said finally, stepping back. The communication array hummed with renewed clarity, the crystals glowing with pure, steady light. "I've integrated your randomized phase variance into your quantum field. Try to hack that." Kavoth studied the readings, his head frills rippling with what Maya now recognized as amazement. This is unprecedented. You've modified our sacred technologies without destroying their essential nature. How did you know it would work? Maya shrugged. I didn't. But sometimes you have to trust your instincts and just dive in. Trust. Instincts. Kavoth pronounced the words carefully, as if tasting them. These are not concepts we Silurians typically associate with technological advancement. Yet, he gestured at the restored communication array. The results are undeniable. Speaking of results, Maya said, you might want to trace where that hack attempt originated from. Someone with intimate knowledge of Silurian tech tried to compromise your systems right before a major council session. That's not a coincidence. Kavoth's expression shifted to one of grave concern. Indeed. Perhaps you would be willing to assist us further. Your unique perspective could be invaluable. Maya hesitated. Getting involved in alien politics was generally a career-limiting move for station engineers, but there was something in Kavoth's manner, a genuine respect that went beyond the usual diplomatic niceties. Sure, she heard herself say. I'll help. But first, let me show you how to maintain these modifications. Over dinner, maybe. The station's synth food isn't great, but I've got some real coffee in my quarters. The moment the words left her mouth, Maya knew something had changed. Kavoth went absolutely still, his scales shifting to a deep, resonant blue she'd never seen before. The crystal walls around them hummed at a new frequency. You would share your private sustenance. Kavoth's voice had taken on a formal tone that set off warning bells in Maya's mind. In your personal dwelling. Yes, Maya replied, suddenly uncertain. Is that a problem? Kavoth's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly. No, not a problem. It is an honor. I accept your proposal, Maya Chen. May our union bring wisdom to both our peoples. Maya's diagnostic tool slipped from suddenly numb fingers. What? But Kavoth had already turned away, his robe swirling with patterns that looked suspiciously like celebration. As he glided from the room, Maya had the sinking feeling that she'd just done something far more significant than fixing a quantum communication array. The station's fusion core hummed on, indifferent to the fact that its chief engineer had apparently just gotten engaged to a Silurian ambassador through the diplomatic equivalent of asking someone if they wanted to grab coffee. It was going to be a very interesting shift rotation. The price of protocol. News traveled faster than light on Starbase 7, especially when it involved an unprecedented diplomatic union between a human engineer and a Silurian ambassador. Maya discovered this fact the hard way during her morning diagnostic rounds. The first sign something was different came from the station's environmental systems. As she walked through the normally sterile corridors, she noticed the air recyclers were pumping out trace amounts of something that smelled like Silurian ceremonial incense. Then there were the looks. Maintenance crews, diplomats, and even the usually aloof Centaurian merchants all stopped to stare as she passed. Chen, a familiar voice called out. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the station's xenobiologist, jogged up beside her, dark eyes dancing with barely contained amusement. Were you planning to tell your best friend about your engagement, or was I supposed to hear it from the Regelian gossip feeds? Maya groaned, pressing her palm against a biometric scanner to access the primary maintenance shaft. It's not what you think. There's been a misunderstanding. Really? Sarah followed her into the shaft, ducking under a tangle of power conduits. Because according to the official Silurian diplomatic bulletin, you and Ambassador Kavoth are united in sacred accord through the ritual of domestic sustenance sharing. I invited him for coffee. Maya's voice echoed off the metal walls. Coffee, Sarah. In what universe does that translate to marriage? Apparently, in the Silurian one. Sarah handed her a plasma spanner. Their entire society is built on ritualized interactions. Inviting someone into your private space to share food is basically their equivalent of getting down on one knee. Maya tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. Well, Kavoth's going to have to unannounce it. I can't be engaged to an ambassador. I have power grid maintenance schedules to worry about. About that, Sarah's tone made Maya look up. The station commander wants to see you. Now, Commander Elena Patel's office offered a panoramic view of the swirling nebula that served as Starbase 7's backdrop. The commander herself stood at the window, hands clasped behind her back, her dark skin illuminated by the cosmic light show outside. Engineer Chen, Patel said without turning, I assume you understand why you're here. Ma'am, I can explain. Can you? Patel turned, fixing Maya with a penetrating stare. Can you explain why I have the Silurian High Council requesting emergency docking clearance for their ceremonial fleet, or why the hegemony's representative is threatening to withdraw from trade negotiations because they weren't consulted about this strategic alliance? Maya's heart sank. It's a cultural misunderstanding, Commander. I didn't know that inviting a Silurian ambassador to your quarters was tantamount to a marriage proposal. No, I don't suppose you did. Patel's expression softened slightly. Unfortunately, that doesn't change our current situation. A holographic display sprang to life between them, showing a complex web of diplomatic relationships. At its center, pulsing red, was the connection between Earth and the Silurian Empire. The Silurians are one of our strongest allies in this sector, Patel continued. Their quantum technology keeps our communications secure, their trade routes keep our economy stable, and their military keeps the hegemony in check. We cannot afford a diplomatic incident. What are you saying? I'm saying that for now, this engagement stands. Patel held up a hand to forestall Maya's protest, at least until we can find a way to dissolve it that doesn't involve interstellar incident. As if on cue, the office door slid open to reveal Kavoth. The ambassador's scales were shimmering with patterns Maya had never seen before, and he wore ceremonial robes that seemed to capture and reflect the nebula's light. My intended, he said, bowing deeply. The High Council's representatives approach. We must prepare for the ritual of acknowledgement. Maya looked desperately at Patel, who simply raised an eyebrow. I'm not dressed for any rituals, she managed. I have brought traditional garments, Kavoth said, producing a shimmer silk robe that seemed to be made of captured starlight. They have been modified to accommodate human physiology. Sarah, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. I'll help her prepare, Ambassador. It's a human tradition for friends to assist in such matters. As they left the commander's office, Sarah steering Maya toward the diplomatic sector, Maya finally found her voice. This is insane. I can't actually go through with this. Maybe not, Sarah agreed, helping her into the surprisingly comfortable robe. But right now, you're the linchpin holding together 3 different diplomatic crises. Besides, she adjusted the robe's crystal clasps with practiced ease. Koth's not exactly hard on the eyes, for a 7-foot-tall lizard person. That's not. Maya stopped, distracted by her reflection in a crystalline wall. The robe transformed her usual practical appearance into something ethereal, almost alien. This isn't about attraction. It's about the fact that I accidentally got engaged because I didn't read the xenocultural briefing thoroughly enough. Then read it now, Sarah said, pressing a data crystal into her hand. Because in about 20 minutes, you're going to be performing sacred rituals with the highest-ranking members of Silurian society. Might be good to know what you're getting into this time. Maya clutched the crystal, feeling its cool surface pulse against her palm. Through the windows, she could see the first ships of the Silurian ceremonial fleet emerging from quantum space, their crystalline hulls refracting the nebula's light into thousands of rainbow patterns. Somewhere in the distance, the station's fusion core hummed its steady song, reminding her that at heart, she was still an engineer. And engineers, she told herself, solved problems, even if those problems involved accidental engagements to alien ambassadors. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the shimmer silk ripple like liquid light. All right, she said. Show me how to not start an interstellar war with my future in-laws. The look Kvoth gave her when she re-entered the diplomatic chamber, properly attired and somewhat briefed on Silurian customs, made her wonder if perhaps there was more to this arrangement than simple protocol. His scales shifted to that deep, resonant blue she'd seen before, and the crystal walls hummed in harmony with his biorhythms. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be the diplomatic disaster everyone feared. But first, she had to figure out how to bow in a way that didn't accidentally declare war on someone's homeworld. The things they never taught you in engineering school. Diplomatic crisis. The ritual of acknowledgement was proceeding exactly as the ancient Silurian texts prescribed, which meant, naturally, that everything was about to go terribly wrong. Maya stood beside Kvoth in the station's grand diplomatic chamber, surrounded by crystalline pillars that pulsed with biographical light. The Silurian High Council members, each adorned in ceremonial robes that made Kvoth's outfit look casual, formed a perfect hexagon around them. Their scales shifted in synchronized patterns, creating a hypnotic display that the human diplomatic corps was. Diplomatic crisis. The Hegemony's declaration arrived with all the subtlety of a supernova. Their flagship, a massive vessel that looked like abstract art rendered in black metal, dropped out of hyperspace less than a kilometer from Starbase 7's outer rings. The message that followed was equally blunt. The union between human and Silurian violates 600 years of established protocol. The Hegemony ambassador's hologram declared, its crystalline form shifting between shapes as it spoke. This station has 24 hours to nullify the engagement, or we will consider it an act of aggression. Maya watched the recording for the third time in Director Harrison's emergency briefing room, surrounded by representatives from a dozen species. Kvoth sat beside her, his scales a deep, troubled purple. "They're bluffing," Maya said, more confidently than she felt. "The Hegemony wouldn't risk war over a marriage." "The Hegemony," Kvoth replied softly, "has maintained its power through absolute control of interspecies relations. Our union threatens that control." "It's more than that," Harrison added, looking exhausted. "The Hegemony has been trying to establish exclusive trading rights with the Silurian Consortium for decades. A human-Silurian union would give Earth priority access to their quantum technology." Maya's diagnostic tool chirped, drawing her attention to a sudden spike in the station's power grid. "Speaking of technology," she muttered, studying the readings, "we've got bigger problems." As if on cue, the lights flickered. The station's artificial gravity hiccuped, causing several diplomats to float momentarily before settling back to the deck. "The Hegemony vessel is generating some kind of interference field," Maya explained, her fingers dancing across her holographic display. "It's affecting our primary systems." And she frowned. "There's something else. Kvoth, look at these quantum signatures." Kvoth leaned in, his head frills extending as he studied the data. "These patterns, they're similar to the hack attempt on our communication array." "Exactly." Maya stood, her mind racing ahead of her words. "The Hegemony isn't just threatening us. They're actively trying to disable the station. And they're using modified Silurian technology to do it." The room erupted in a cacophony of alien voices. Director Harrison raised his hands for silence. "How long until our systems fail?" Maya ran the calculations. "At this rate, 6 hours, maybe less." They're being subtle about it, making it look like normal system degradation. "By the time our backup systems kick in, it'll be too late." "Can we stop it?" "Maybe." Maya looked at Kvoth. "But I'm going to need access to your quantum cores. All of them." Kvoth's scales shifted to a deep, resonant blue. "The cores are sacred technology. No non-Silurian has ever." "Well, your almost wife is about to be the first," Maya interrupted. "Because those cores are our only chance of surviving this." For a long moment, Kvoth was silent. The other diplomats watched, holding their various forms of breath. Finally, his scales rippled with a pattern Maya hadn't seen before. "Follow me," he said. The Silarian diplomatic sector's inner sanctum was a marvel of bioengineered technology. Crystalline structures pulsed with living light, responding to the presence of their Silurian guardians. At the center, 3 quantum cores hung suspended in fields of pure energy, each one containing more computing power than every human system on the station combined. "Beautiful," Maya whispered, her engineer's heart racing at the sight. Then she pulled out her tools. "Now let's see what these babies can really do." For the next 4 hours, Maya worked in a frenzy of creative destruction. She dismantled centuries-old Silurian protocols, rebuilt them with human improvisation, and wove it all together with the kind of desperate inspiration that humans were famous for throughout the galaxy. Kavoth watched in fascinated horror as she essentially rewrote the fundamental laws of quantum computing. "This is unprecedented," he kept saying, his scales shifting through colors Maya didn't even have names for. "You keep using that word," Maya grunted, deep in the guts of the 3rd core. "I'm starting to think you like unprecedented." "Perhaps," Kavoth admitted. "That is why I find you so intriguing." Maya's hands stopped moving for a moment. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw something in his alien features that might have been affection, or possibly indigestion. She still wasn't great at reading Silurian expressions. The moment was broken by another gravity fluctuation. This one lasted longer, sending tools floating around the room. "Time's up," Maya said, returning to work. The hegemony's getting impatient. She made one final adjustment and stepped back. "Okay, that should do it. What exactly have you done?" Maya grinned. "Remember how I modified your communication array? Well, I just did the same thing to your quantum cores, but bigger. When the hegemony tries to access our systems again." She didn't have to wait long for results. Within minutes, the hegemony's interference field collapsed in on itself. Their massive ship went dark, its systems overwhelmed by the feedback loop Maya had created using the quantum cores. "You turned our sacred technology into a weapon," Kavoth said, sounding somewhere between impressed and scandalized. "No," Maya corrected, watching as emergency lights flickered on aboard the hegemony vessel. "I turned it into a mirror. They tried to use Silurian tech against us, so I showed them what happens when you don't fully understand the tools you're playing with." The station's comm system crackled to life. The hegemony ambassador's hologram appeared, its crystalline form notably less impressive than before. The ambassador's voice carried a hint of static. "We wish to reopen negotiations." Maya looked at Kavoth, whose scales were now shifting through patterns she recognized as amusement. "Should we tell them?" she asked. "Tell them what?" "That they just got outsmarted by a human engineer using technology she learned about because she accidentally proposed marriage to a Silurian diplomat over coffee." Kavoth's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly. "Definitely amusement this time. Perhaps we should let them wonder." Maya laughed, and for the first time since this whole mess began, she felt like maybe, just maybe, this accidental engagement wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. Of course, they still had a wedding to plan, but that was tomorrow's problem. Breaking tradition. In the aftermath of the hegemony incident, Starbase 7 buzzed with a new kind of energy. The story of how a human engineer had turned sacred Silurian technology into an improvised defense system spread through the diplomatic channels like wildfire. Maya found herself becoming something of a legend, much to her dismay. "I heard she rewrote quantum physics," she overheard a junior diplomat whisper as she passed through the station's central promenade. "They're saying she communes with the crystal matrices." Maya rolled her eyes and adjusted her tool belt. She had more pressing concerns than station gossip. The wedding, or union ceremony, as the Silurians called it, was 3 days away, and she still hadn't figured out how to merge human and Silurian traditions without causing an interstellar incident. She found Kavoth in his office, surrounded by holographic displays showing various ceremonial arrangements. His scales shifted to a warm copper tone when she entered, a color she'd started to associate with pleasure. "Maya," he said, using her first name with careful precision. "I was just reviewing the traditional Silurian binding rituals." "About that," Maya said, pulling up a chair. "We need to talk about the ceremony. Specifically, the part where I'm supposed to spend 6 hours reciting quantum harmonics while suspended in a crystal matrix." Kvoth's head frills rippled with concern. "It is a sacred tradition. The harmonics align the biological fields of both participants." "Yeah. Well, humans don't have biological fields. At least, not the kind your crystals can read." Maya pulled out her diagnostic tool, which had become something of a security blanket. "But I think I have a solution." She projected a modified diagram of the traditional ceremony setup. "See, I've been studying the quantum resonance patterns of your ceremonial crystals. With some modifications, we could create a hybrid field that responds to both Silurian and human biochemistry." Kvoth studied the diagram, his secondary eyelids flickering rapidly. "You wish to modify the sacred crystals. More like, enhance them." Maya grinned. "Think of it as upgrading tradition." For a long moment, Kvoth was silent. Maya had learned that Silurians processed change differently than humans. They needed time to adjust their worldview when presented with new ideas. "This would be unprecedented," he said finally. "You're marrying the human engineer," Maya reminded him. "Everything about this is unprecedented." Kvoth's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep, thoughtful blue. "The council will need to be convinced. Then let's convince them." The Silurian High Council chamber was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture. Towering spires of living crystal surrounded a central platform where Maya now stood, feeling distinctly out of place in her engineering uniform among the elaborately robed council members. "You propose to alter the sacred binding crystals," the chief counselor stated, her scales a stern shade of gray. "These rituals have remained unchanged for 10,000 years." Maya took a deep breath. "With respect, counselor, they've remained unchanged because they've never needed to adapt before. But this union isn't just about two people. It's about two species learning to work together." She activated her diagnostic tool, projecting a complex diagram into the center of the chamber. "The modifications I'm suggesting don't diminish the sacred nature of the crystals. They expand it. Watch." Maya had spent 3 days preparing this demonstration. She linked her tool to a small sample crystal, channeling energy through it in a precise pattern. The crystal began to glow, but instead of the usual Silurian harmonics, it produced a new kind of resonance, one that responded to both her human biochemistry and the Silurian energy fields around her. The chamber filled with gasps as the crystal's light shifted through impossible colors, creating patterns that shouldn't have been possible according to traditional Silurian physics. "This is how I see your technology," Maya explained, her voice steadied despite her racing heart. "Not as something to be preserved unchanged, but as something that can grow and evolve. Just like us." She glanced at Kvoth, who stood watching with an expression she was learning to read as pride. "The hegemony thought they could use your technology against us because they saw it as a tool to be controlled. But I see it as something alive, something that can adapt and change while staying true to its essential nature." The chief counselor rose, her robes rippling with embedded light. "You speak of our sacred technologies as if they were living things. Aren't they?" Maya challenged. "Your crystals respond to biological fields, grow and change with use, develop new patterns over time. Sounds pretty alive to me." A murmur ran through the council chamber. Maya noticed several of the younger council members leaning forward, their scales shifting to colors she associated with intense interest. "And you believe," the chief counselor continued, "that this hybrid approach could be applied to the binding ceremony?" "I know it can." Maya projected another diagram. "By modifying the ceremonial matrix, we can create a ritual that honors both our traditions. Something new, but rooted in the old. Isn't that what this union is supposed to be about?" Kvoth stepped forward. "If I may, honored council." At their acknowledgement, he continued, "Maya's understanding of our technology, while unconventional, has already proven its worth. The hegemony's attempt to use our own systems against us was thwarted not through force, but through innovation. Perhaps it is time we considered that tradition can be strengthened by change, not weakened by it. The council chamber fell silent. Maya held her breath, watching as the chief counselor's scales shifted through various shades of contemplation. Finally, she spoke. In 10,000 years of recorded history, no non-Silurian has ever modified our sacred technologies. She paused, her secondary eyelids flickering. Yet in less than a standard week, you have done so twice. Once to defend us, and once to unite us. Perhaps this is a sign that our traditions must evolve. Maya felt Kavoth's hand slip into hers, a very human gesture he must have researched. His scales were warm against her skin, pulsing with colors she was beginning to understand meant joy. Your modifications to the binding ceremony are approved, the chief counselor declared. Let this union truly be a bridge between our peoples. As they left the council chamber, Maya nudged Kavoth with her elbow. See, sometimes unprecedented isn't such a bad thing. Indeed. He looked down at her, his scales shifting to that copper tone she'd grown so fond of. Though I must ask, what other traditions are you planning to upgrade? Maya grinned. Well, I have some thoughts about the traditional post-ceremony feast. How do you feel about coffee? Kavoth's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly, definitely amusement. As long as you're not accidentally proposing to anyone else. For the first time since this whole adventure began, Maya laughed without reservation. Maybe, just maybe, this accidental marriage was turning into something real, something unprecedented in all the right ways. Of course, they still had to get through the ceremony itself, but that was tomorrow's problem. A new understanding. The day of the union ceremony dawned with an unexpected crisis. The station's artificial gravity began fluctuating in a rhythmic pattern that Maya immediately recognized. The crystals, she muttered, studying her diagnostic readings. They're resonating with the ceremonial matrix. I didn't account for the scale of the energy field. Kavoth found her in engineering, surrounded by holographic displays and scattered tools. His ceremonial robes, shimmering with patterns that seemed to capture starlight itself, contrasted sharply with her grease-stained uniform. Most brides spend their wedding morning in preparation rituals, he observed, his scales rippling with what she now recognized as affectionate amusement. Most brides aren't trying to keep their wedding venue from tearing itself apart. Maya replied, not looking up from her calculations. The modified binding crystals are interfacing with the station's systems in ways I didn't predict. The energy output is exponential. Kavoth moved to stand beside her, studying the readings. Perhaps, he said carefully, this is not merely a technical problem. Maya finally looked up at him. What do you mean? The crystals respond to biological fields, to emotions, intentions, connections, if they are resonating more strongly than anticipated. Are you saying our accidental engagement is causing a feedback loop in the station's systems? Maya asked, incredulous. Kavoth's scales shifted to that warm copper tone she'd grown to love. I am saying that perhaps the connection between us is stronger than either of us realized. Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks. She'd been so focused on the technical aspects of their union, on making the ceremony work, that she hadn't fully processed how her feelings for Kavoth had evolved. What had started as an accidental cultural misunderstanding had become something real, something that apparently even the crystals could sense. Right, she said, pushing back from her workstation. Then we need to work with the resonance, not against it. Help me recalibrate the ceremonial matrix. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Maya and Kavoth worked together, combining her innovative approach with his deep understanding of Silurian technology. They didn't just modify the ceremony setup, they transformed it into something entirely new. By the time guests began arriving at the ceremonial chamber, the station had stabilized. The modified binding crystals hung suspended in a complex geometric pattern, pulsing with a gentle light that seemed to bridge the gap between human and Silurian perception. It's beautiful, Director Harrison admitted, examining the setup. Though I'm still not sure how you're going to explain this to Starfleet Command. I'm filing it under Innovative Diplomatic Solutions, Maya replied, adjusting her formal uniform. She'd refused to wear traditional Silurian robes, but had compromised by having patterns of light similar to Kvothe's embedded in her clothing. Besides, after the hegemony incident, they can't complain about results. The ceremony itself was unlike anything either culture had seen before. The traditional Silurian quantum harmonics were there, but interwoven with human vows. The binding crystals responded to both their presences, creating patterns of light and energy that told the story of their unique connection. When Maya and Kvothe spoke their combined vows, the crystals erupted in a display that drew gasps from the assembled diplomats. Colors that shouldn't have been possible danced through the chamber. And for a moment, everyone present could see the world as both human and Silurian, a merging of perspectives that transcended species. Well, the chief counselor said afterward, her scales shifting through shades of approval, I believe it's safe to say this union has indeed broken new ground. That's what humans do best. Maya replied, her hand entwined with Kvothe's. We find new ways forward, especially when we work together. The reception that followed was equally unprecedented. Maya had insisted on serving coffee alongside traditional Silurian refreshments, much to everyone's amusement. She'd even modified the replication patterns to make it safe for Silurian consumption. To think, Kvothe mused, carefully sipping his modified coffee, that all of this began because you invited me to share this beverage. Maybe it wasn't such an accident after all, Maya suggested. Maybe the universe knew what it was doing. Kvothe's scales shifted to a new color, one she'd never seen before. The universe, or perhaps simply two people willing to look past their differences. Maya smiled, watching as human and Silurian diplomats mingled, sharing stories and customs with newfound understanding. Already, she could see the ripple effects of their union. 3 other species had approached the council about modifying traditional protocols, and there was talk of establishing a permanent cultural exchange program. You know, she said, when I first arrived on this station, I thought my job was just to keep things running. Fix what was broken, maintain the status quo. And now I think maybe the most important things we can fix are the boundaries between us. All it takes is being willing to try something unprecedented. Kvothe's secondary eyelids flickered with emotion. You have changed more than just our traditions, Maya Chen. You have changed how we see possibility itself. We've changed it, she corrected him. Together. As if in response, the binding crystals pulsed with a warm light, their energy fields harmonizing with the station's systems in a way that felt right, balanced in a way neither human nor Silurian technology alone could achieve. It wasn't the end of their story, of course. There would be more challenges, more boundaries to break, more traditions to reinvent. But as Maya looked at her new husband, his scales shimmering with colors that spoke of love and hope and possibility, she knew they would face it all together. After all, that's what marriage was about, human, Silurian, or otherwise. Finding new ways forward together, even if it started with something as simple as an invitation for coffee. The station's fusion core hummed in harmony with the crystal matrices, a sound that Maya now recognized as the music of 2 worlds coming together. It wasn't perfect, but it was unprecedented. And unprecedented, she was learning, was exactly where the best stories began.